Henry Jones Jr., or Indiana Jones, which he named himself after the family dog, is one of the most iconic fictional characters of all time. He is one of those characters that have been referenced in so many things over so many years, and will definitely continue to be referenced in many things in the future. More than likely, regardless of how long it's been, people will know who Indiana Jones is and why his movies are so memorable. Yes, it's been a long time since that third movie, and people of more recent times who have grown up with the more recent ones probably aren't as knowledgeable about those ones, but people do know through social osmosis who Indiana Jones is, and why he's as great as he is. Or at least, you would think so. In general, I feel like people take advantage of who Indiana Jones is and what his series really represents, and the character arc that has went through these 5 movies, and also a TV show that I of course have went over in the previous video. But looking through the life of Indiana Jones, not only do you get to see a character who's a lot different than most action stars, not only just in the day, but also just in general, including characters from more recent movies, but also this character arc, which regardless of the quality of the movie that the character arc is within, is a very interesting and very well done character arc that I feel like is very gratifying. Rebel! Very natural. Once again, for a bit more context, definitely go and watch my Young Indiana Jones show video, where I talk about all the weird, rascally ideas and adventures that young Indiana Jones went through. Motherfucker went through the war and fought a vampire. Yeah, that show's weird, but it really did show this much younger Indiana Jones who went from inspiring adventurer who had this big high belief of that the world could be changed and that he had to do something over his time. He was very irresponsible, but slowly grew to be a much more responsible leader and adventurer over time. However, Indiana is an imperfect character and would continue to be so over the next several years. I didn't quite get into it in that video, mostly because I was saving it for the earlier parts of this video, but there is indeed multiple adventures that happened before the very original movie. One of which, in fact, being one of the original trilogy, so that's weird, isn't it? Before we get into those, let's get back into where Indiana Jones started. Released June 12, 1981, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg conceived of Raiders of the Lost Ark in the early 1970s. Seeking to modernize the serial films of the early 20th century, what basically ran for movies that were based on pulp heroes of the era, Lucas focused on making some kind of explorer guy go through some sort of tomb, which is a very easy idea that really made the people of the 30s go absolutely wild because, oh, we've never been anywhere and we would love to raid a tomb. Though pre-release polling showed little audience interest, by the point of its release it became the highest grossing film of the year. The film was then nominated for several awards, won 5 Academy Awards, 7 Saturn Awards, and 1 BAFTA. Now considered one of the greatest films ever made, Raiders of the Lost Ark, now known as Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, if you're wrong, or just Raiders, if you're cool, eventually got 2 sequels. That being Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, or just Temple of Doom and Last Crusade, if you're cool. That would seemingly be it, besides the TV show that was released in the 90s, and eventually would get a 4th movie in 2008 with Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, and the most recent film in 2023, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which weirdly has the opposite effect of, I'm sure lots of people were interested, but nobody went and saw it. I am a big fan of Indiana Jones, right? Is it my favorite franchise of all time? I wouldn't say necessarily, and in general, it's only recently that I really got into all the different adventures, right? I'd mostly only ever watched the first 3 movies. Yeah, though I grew up during the era where the Crystal Skull was on, like, FX all of the time, and I probably should have watched it at that time because I had every reason to. I never did till recently during this marathon. Isn't that weird? But I always had thought Indiana Jones was incredibly cool, its theme was fantastic, and those first 3 movies are absolutely amazing. And rewatching them, my opinion certainly hasn't changed. Of course, I did all this because the recent movie was coming out, and I decided, you know what? I do like going through the entire history of a character, and considering how old both now Indy and Harrison Ford is, there you go, yeah, it might as well be a good time, because more than likely Dial of Destiny will be the very last movie ever made for Indiana Jones. In general, Indiana Jones is a character played by Harrison Ford, and a younger Indiana Jones could be played by someone else, but we're at the point where a slightly younger Indiana Jones would probably just make sense to still be Harrison Ford, and it would be weird if he was played by Chris Pratt, which almost happened, maybe? That's still not very clear, actually. But we have actors who have played younger Indiana Joneses, and they've already covered a time where it would have made sense to make a younger Indiana Jones Adventures, and again, whole other video. But like, there's no other time you could really make another Indiana Jones movie, right? You could make multiple adventures, and they sure have, of other books and video games, and they might in the future, right? It's still entirely possible to make something that takes place in between 3 and 4, and now 4 and 5, probably. We'll get to why a little bit less of that's the case later. But still, lots of adventures will be had in between and before and after that will be starring a Harrison Ford look-like drawing or 3D model in whatever we're looking at here, you know? And that's all it really should be, because Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford, and Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones. Unlike this one, Harrison Ford does care about a lot, cares about Indiana Jones, so if anything was going to be without him, it shouldn't be Indiana Jones, all right? You can skip to post-Han Solo for Star Wars. You can skip to the new main character for any other Blade Runner movies that you probably shouldn't make. Something Fugitive sequel. They already have moved past with the other character he played in 2 movies, who's played by a bunch others. But this is the one thing you can't change this thing, right? There's lots of other main characters of film franchise that you could recast them in, especially James Bond, but this is one you cannot change. So more than likely, Dial of Destiny, it's the last one. And we only really know one thing that will happen later, and I'll get to that later in the video, but this is basically the end of Indiana Jones' story, and I feel like it's a perfectly fine conclusion to his character. So let's get into who Indiana Jones is and how his character progresses throughout the series. We'll be looking through the series in chronological order, but keep in mind, Temple of Doom was released after Raiders of the Lost Ark, though it takes place before. Don't know why they did that, but it does. And it does kind of give us some context into how he was before the big change in his character and how that leads us into The Last Crusade. I'll be adding in little bits of information from the young Indiana Jones stuff, and also be talking about a whole bunch of weird books and video games that this man stars in, and how it kind of helps the character arc and the character of Indiana Jones. But of course, this won't just be a look at Indiana Jones as a character, this will also be my own reviews of each 5 of the movies, talking about whether or not I really enjoy them or not. Mostly 3 of them are good, 2 of them are less. We begin all the way back in the 1920s. So there's a gap between 16 years between the end of the young Indiana Jones adventures and where the main Indiana Jones adventures happen, right? In that time, Indiana Jones becomes a much better and much more seasoned adventurer, going on multiple adventures. Where we really begin is in college, where we do get to see a few adventures of him being dragged from place to place, where ultimately he learns some extra stuff about weird little extra magical trinkets that happen to just be around in these different areas, often going up against treasure hunters and black market salesmen, mostly the main villain of the original Indiana Jones being Belloc, a man that he met in college. I'm gonna say this right now, but there's multiple characters that Indiana Jones just kind of knows that were not part of these earlier adventures, were not part of any earlier adventure besides the one that they were introduced in, and Indiana Jones happened to have known, and probably in college. One notable adventure of these is that Indiana Jones fights for the seemingly magical unicorn horn sword thing, which he ends up dropping inside the interior world, the world inside the world, the like Hollow Earth theory type thing. If you've never heard of it, it's even crazier than Flat Earth theory, and it was before Flat Earthers were ever a thing. So if you ever want to know if the world's going crazy now, no, it's kind of always been crazy, because people back in the 30s and 20s actually thought this was a real thing, to the point that they made books about it. That's what Journey to the Center of the Earth is about, people who actually thought that they might be able to do that if they did anything in that book, I guess now movie. Indiana Jones, as he will ultimately do throughout most of this series, won't believe that any of this even happened and that it was kind of a dream, or that any of this like magical events that will be around him will ultimately be some kind of scientific thing that he's not entirely sure how to explain, and it doesn't really matter because most of the time in these adventures, Indiana Jones kind of loses this stuff because the temple collapses around him. And it happens every time. During the early 30s, he begins to have certain run-ins with the earlier version of the Nazi Party, who are beginning to look into certain things to help them in the future war effort, which ultimately means, magical artifacts that Indiana will have to fight them for because, they probably belong in a museum and not from Nazis. But one of the important parts about this section of the series is that Indiana Jones gets married. Now, Indiana Jones does begin to be a teacher, and on his own time, he begins going off on adventures to find things, mostly to help the museum that is part of the school he works at, the school that is, of course, owned by a family friend of theirs that was probably going to show up in the show if it had continued, but in general, first gets introduced in Raiders. He's a very fun, likable character. It's clear that Indiana looked up to this guy much more than his dad. But yes, on some of those adventures, he happens to bring along one of his students, whom are adults, by the way. It's probably not right to fraternize with students, but I guess if they're adults, then what am I gonna do? And after their original harrowing adventure, they get married in between that book and her next appearance, in which she dies in the beginning of the book, in which, weirdly, if you know Harrison Ford, it's about a plane crash. Not the only time a plane crashes for Indiana Jones, by the way, and every time I see it, I think about how great of a pilot Harrison Ford is. It's this mini character arc that happens in the books as he continues his adventures in order to continue to better the world and to better himself. All of this happens after the mentioned backstory that happens in Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's time to get to that weird part. In the beginning of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana does go to Marion Crane, and Marion Crane mentions the fact that they had met when she was much younger. She was 16 when Indiana Jones had first dated her. He was around like 30, so yeah, that's weird. That's very weird. That being said, it's sort of a thing where you kind of have to ignore that part in Indiana Jones, because in real life, I feel like I'd beat the shit out of anyone that would do something like that. So yeah, this is such a weird part of the character. Ultimately, this sort of represents the rock bottom of Indiana Jones as a character. Weirdly, something that happened before his very first fictional appearance, but we sort of have to take the context of what happened before, of him, you know, being a big man whore, as mentioned before, ultimately showing that he has been making more and more mistakes in his love life, and is becoming more and more overly confident in himself. And it's in this moment that he figures out that he has really hit rock bottom and has to start really smartening up. And it's at this moment where Indiana Jones begins to actually change himself and become a much better person as time goes forward. He was too overconfident in himself that he didn't realize that any problem would come about from getting with his professor's daughter. Yeah, one of the main people that had taught Indy in college that helped him become as great of an archaeologist as he was is Marion's father, who he was on an adventure with when he had met his daughter. Indiana Jones doesn't stop being some kind of ladies' man. He doesn't stop going on adventures, but he stops being as overtly confident as he was in such a way where he'd be as absolutely toxic as he was to Marion when she was younger. Sort of invisible arc that's happening throughout the books and games before the very first movie ever happens. An arc we get to see as this character progresses throughout the original movie, as we do get to see him clearly being this more confident action man, and we do see that he is clearly much more of a caring person by the end of it, as he nearly, you know, bazookas a whole magical god case for his girlfriend. That being said, he is still very much an adventurer and a ladies' man, and it's certainly, you know, not the last time he's going to meet up with a woman during the adventure, and they're gonna be smooching. As in 1984, the sequel that was then turned into a prequel for whatever reason, which people originally didn't like, but people now realize is much better than they thought because it's really fun, and it's my favorite, by the way. Temple of Doom takes place before the very original movie, in which we very much see exactly that. Indiana Jones is currently on a mission. He's brought there by this guy who he weirdly met while trying to find the eggs of a dinosaur, that is canon, who did help him help out this one Chinese agent to stop another evil guy who tried to take over China with help of a magical orb that either made a fake dragon or actually summoned a real dragon. I'm going with the first one because dragons in Indiana Jones shouldn't be a thing. I don't know why they're a thing more than once, but we're ignoring both of those times. But Temple of Doom shows the adventure of, after Shanghai, he escapes with help of his partner Short Round that he had met while Short Round was just living on the streets, and they end up just sort of taking Willie Scott, a woman who is an aspiring actor who wanted to try and make her break out in Shanghai and ended up nearly getting murdered by the boss because Willie is very, very clueless. The adventure is actually a pretty typical one, ultimately escaping onto a boat, getting onto a plane, it crashing, again, haha, Harrison Ford, but ultimately crashing into the Himalayas, finding an Indian village of Mayapur, ultimately finding out that there's something wrong going with the Maharaja, and a group of thuggy cultists, them being an actual cult that did exist, not some random thing they made up, Though, obviously, the way they act is a little bit, not the way they were. At least, I'm pretty sure not. As they have taken one of the 5 Sankara stones, one of which was this treasured relic of this village. Honestly, I feel like it is a great idea to watch this movie before you ever watch the original one. Obviously, I also recommend watching The Young Indiana Jones Adventures before watching these because I'm insane, but also I feel like this is a really good introduction towards this character. At first, you do think, just like the original one, that he's some kind of big action man and he just wants to fight guys and just find treasures and collect them, and that's sort of what they're kind of doing. But in fact, the real point of Indiana Jones is that Indiana Jones isn't just there to beat up guys and just go on an action-y adventure. He's there to help people. At this point in his life, he's done with just wanting to go on adventures. Though yes, he does it for the thrill, he ultimately has begun to do them for good reason, to stop bad people from getting weird magical things, or at least valuable things, that belong to other people, either other cultures, or something that probably should be treasured by people who actually want to study. By the way, after meeting up with the Maharaja in a very funny scene where it's a lot of Willie kind of being freaked out by food that I'm pretty sure would not be served in real-life India back in the 1930s, but then again, wouldn't you try burnt snake? Seems interesting. And after being allowed to stay there, they're seemingly about to be murdered by some secret thugs, where they end up finding a weird secret passage that leads into this big crusher machine, which can only be turned off by Willie sticking her hand in a big bug hole, which, good lord, that bug hole is the most terrifying thing in the world. Honestly, if I was her, Indiana and Short Round would probably be dead, because I could not shove my hand in there. I would not last long on Fear Factor or Survivor, just saying. But the group looks in on their big sacrifice that they do, the whole Kali Ma hand through the chest thing, where soon they're caught, and Indiana, after being given some mystical goo, is mind controlled, and it's only through the love and the ass beating of Short Round that he's able to get out of it. This is weirdly not the conclusion of it, as they save Willie from being shoved into big lava portal, as even after they save all of the kids that have been turned into slaves to mine the underground to find the rest of the stones, the big action scene afterwards is them escaping. Honestly, I feel like the third act of the film begins to slow down a little bit, because it probably could have had other stuff in the meantime, and then there's big last battle. Like the bridge part. The bridge part, which is the real actual conclusion of the movie, where ultimately they're cornered and Indiana Jones cuts the big bridge that they're on. That should have been the, middle of it. As they tried to get to the main area, they should have been ambushed by the guys, and they should have fought them on the bridge. That would have been a lot better pacing and a lot better written of a movie. I do still really enjoy Temple of Doom. Despite its not great depiction of India and Indian cuisine, it's got 3 very likable characters, and the funny to the fact that she's annoying and constantly gets put through bad situations, Willie Scott, and also the amazing and lovable Short Round, whom is absolutely fantastic, and Ke Huy Quan has, of course, come back into acting, and it's very great to see him in more things. All of it has this cool, mystical aspect to it, which makes it so very different than the rest of the series, at least more mystical than other parts of the series can get, while also still keeping it grounded. It's weird that there's voodoo and shit, and there's a big crusher machine, and there's child slaves, and Kali Ma hand through chest thing. It's just so enjoyable and weird, and I love Temple of Doom, just due to the fact that it's constant action-packed craziness that keeps you entertained the entire time. Absolutely love Temple of Doom. I think it's basically as great as the other two, which people give a lot more praise for. But the other reason why I feel like Temple of Doom is the great way to introduce this character, because it shows Indiana Jones on a base level. This is a great introduction to who he is now that he's grown up to be the big adventure-y guy and archaeologist that he wanted to be when he was younger. He goes on multiple kinds of adventures just like this. Honestly, it might not be a bad idea to read some of the books that lead into it. Honestly, I wouldn't recommend too many of the books of the Indiana Jones series, but they also give similar adventures and do add background to the characters that we know of the main series. Leading into Temple of Doom is clearly the biggest adventure he's went on, and it's a very great showing of who Indiana Jones is as a character. A man trying to learn and better himself from his past, but a person who's perfectly fine with being a cool action hero still. But Indiana Jones isn't just a regular action hero. What makes him great is especially shown in the other two movies, but is shown here. Indiana Jones is this dynamic blend of intelligence and courage. He isn't just a typical action hero who's ready to jump in and fight people. He has an academic prowess and a vast knowledge of ancient civilizations which enable him to unravel whatever weird things around him are showing up. He relies on his has intellect as much as physical strength to overcome obstacles and outsmart all of the big baddies that are coming to try and kill him. He uses his smarts to outwit his opponents to pretend that he is still in control of them as he tries to get closer to absolutely smush them. He uses the knowledge of what this area is to use it against them through physics and his knowledge of different traps and different areas that he has been in, as he's been through enough temples that he knows what he's doing by this point. He faces danger, absolute mortal danger, with unwavering determination. He shows up to these weird magical caves with the evil cult members and just goes, yeah, alright, gotta get that stone because these are bad guys and I don't want to leave them here. Mostly through his portrayal of Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones as a character brings this great balance of humor and seriousness as he just exudes so much charisma and undeniable charm. He's a cool dude. He's a cool dude that you'd want to have a coffee with or a beer. Also, young Harrison Ford is very attractive. And anytime that man can be shirtless, he should do it. But while he is this rugged action star type character, he is a caring individual who does what he does because it's right and that he can help other people and stop the bad people from using these sorts of objects, as he does perfectly in this movie. This shows you everything you need to know about Indiana Jones as a character. Side note, I wanted to mention the Temple of the Forbidden Eye ride that is no longer a thing, really, but it's funny to consider this canon because the in-universe story shows that Indy and Sala were going to open up this temple they found because it was big enough to bring this one rideable thing in it so that people could look in this temple, because other people were starting to actually want to see all these temples. From the looks of it, from the earlier parts of Young Indiana Jones, this was a regular thing, and I'm not sure if it was a real life thing, but they were seemingly going to build on this market that was suddenly happening to be a thing, that people were going to look into temples, that big rich families were going to look at them, and they were going to have them on a ride. And that's the in-universe reason for it. And they end up just, having to deal with the fact that the whole place is about to collapse, as Indy is also exploring right nearby. Solo, of course, is probably one of the best characters of the whole franchise. Played by John Rhys Davies, he's a memorable, lovable character whom, even as a young man, was a very funny guy that Indiana got along with very quickly. I am again putting that manga page on screen because that's still a real thing. But here's when we get to Raiders of the Lost Ark, the very original movie and the very classic epic adventure of a guy just trying to make his way through the world, getting involved in a weird evil plot by some Nazis and his evil rival, which gets a woman that he had wronged in the past involved in it so that he could finally prove to himself that he is a better person through reconnecting with her. And that's the real purpose of Raiders of the Lost Ark. When you first go into Raiders of the Lost Ark, you can just kind of go in it as it's your pretty typical action adventure, and God knows, in general, it's a lot more basic than that of Temple of Doom. There's not any crazy magic shit till the right end, and it's mostly a lot of action. There's not necessarily a lot of character moments between most of these movies, but especially Raiders. But don't get it wrong, as an action movie, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or again, if you're correct, just Raiders, obviously beginning with the very memorable, we're gonna get the Peruvian sex idol away from the giant rolling ball and from Dr. Octopus, who gets shoved by some spikes, but that immediate opening scene shows you everything you need to know about this character. While obviously Temple of Doom does a great job introducing you, if you wanted to start here, it's still perfectly fine, because in general, this opening scene gives you everything you need to know about Indiana Jones. Everything ever from Indiana Jones has always been based on this scene of this is what he does on a near daily basis. Though probably monthly, because on a daily basis he's probably doing the other stuff that we see immediately afterwards. Mostly he's trying to get these sorts of things so that he could help at the museum that's nearby him, but also to get funding to find other more important finds that he wants to go on. Unfortunately, he's not allowed to do that, as he's asked by the government to help them find something that the Nazis are trying to find, mostly due to the fact that he has done sorts of stuff like this in the past. Going into this movie with the knowledge of everything he did during World War I and after, and the other weird, crazy adventures, and also Temple of Doom, you know for a fact that this is the man who's right for this job. You don't need that context, but having that context makes this scene a lot more interesting, as you're like, yeah, dude, this is a guy that helped, save the world from an evil vampire. But they want him to go find the daughter of his previous teacher, whose notes had been found by the Nazis, who are now looking for what is seemingly, apparently, the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant, which, as the movie explains, is of course the thing that God was placed in so that he could be with the mortals. He goes to Nepal to try and get Marion to help him, and ultimately she's like, go away, you suck, which is entirely understandable considering what had happened. But then she is attacked by the Nazis, who, with help of her apparently Nazi-burning medallion, "Nein, it only burns Nazis, this hurts my hand. Quick, Gunther, get the aloe, my hands." Thus, because of that, in order to get her dad's medallion back, Marion does decide to go with them, where they of course meet Sala, who's just hanging around in Cairo with a monkey. This monkey who ends up apparently working for a man who's in contact with the Nazi. Nazi monkey is Ding in Indiana Jones. They find out that this medallion is in fact one part of the Staff of Ra, this thing that they're going to point towards this little map, which after it gets hit by the sun will reveal the exact location. So after sneaking out badly, they're then found by the Nazis and are set into the snake pit, because of course there's a snake pit, which Indiana really hates because he of course really hates snakes. During that process, by the way, Indiana brings Marion there, and before going to where the Nazis are, he ends up thinking that he accidentally killed Marion. It's a weird part of the movie, and though the action scene is awesome, it being the part where, of course, Harrison Ford was a little bit tired, so he just shot a dude instead of actually having the fight scene that was planned, so they just went, that's funny, go with it. But he ends up finding her with the Nazis, where of course Indiana Jones' rival Belloc happens to be. He is currently working with them, and he was the reason why they were caught and thrown into the snake pit. "I am going to stop Indiana from taking the idol. Now I am going to help the Nazis to open the big god box." But Indy and Marion are able to escape the snakes, and they go to this boat, which is ultimately found immediately by a German U-boat with Marion taken away. Indy sneaks his way on there by taking some Nazi outfits and is able to get a whole bazooka and threatens to blow up the god box. But of course, Belloc's like, "Oh, don't you want to know what's inside?" And then Indiana's like, "Oh, I guess you're right." Him and Marion are tied up so far away that it's thankfully, they're safe enough from when the Nazis open up the big box. Demons and stuff come out and melt their face, and it's horrible and horrifying and awesome. Despite this, the government basically decides to keep all of this a secret from everybody and locks it up. Yes, we'll have a whole show called Top Men, but I'm pretty sure that would just be Warehouse 13, so, And as far as we're all concerned, it's still there and nobody's found it, which, honestly...
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
And though Raiders of the Lost Ark was meant to be the original introduction towards this character, does really begin the character arc of Indiana going forward. Indiana decides that he wants to continue doing this sort of thing, but does realize he can't do it all of the time, and does want to have a life outside of adventuring, but isn't quite ready to actually settle down and do that sort of thing. But it is something he wants to do, as Marion ends up being someone that he actually is in love with. He's met many women and will meet a few of them after the events of this movie, but none of them are Marion Crane. None of them are this woman that he absolutely fell in love with, who's every bit his equal of an adventurer. This is the person that he knows he had wronged and had wanted to get better for, and when the two of them actually begin to connect in the movie, it's a very cute scene that does sort of forgive the weird part of how they opened it, but he's learning from this. It's in this later part of his life that he's beginning to learn from this, and he's wanting to grow, and he's wanting to change for Marion. We do see this in bits and pieces throughout the Marvel comics, which I do not think are canon, because it has a dragon, but also wizards, which weirdly are not as weird, because magic does kind of exist, and that I can accept, but not dragons. Anyway, it's weird, but it does have Marion Crane in it as they do continue their relationship, but she does end up working with the same place that Indiana is working, and does continue with him on certain adventures, and as they connect and grow, they become better people together, right? They also try to find out where Marion's dad is, and they don't, and find some Sasquatches, which again, those books are not canon, but I do like the idea that they did continue onwards with adventures, and they did continue to grow as people. It's just that they weren't ready yet. They weren't ready to move on yet, because Indiana has done this all his life, and he's never really been able to find more than that, so he just wasn't ready. And when it came time for these people to finally settle down and get married, these crazy kids are finally gonna get together, it doesn't happen. And it unfortunately doesn't happen when Marion gets pregnant. And we'll follow that up later on, but it's during this time where Indiana begins to slow down a little bit, as he wants to sort of just move on and just keep as a teacher. As the year before The Last Crusade happens, there's not as much adventures that happen canonically. Most of them are in the Choose Your Own Adventure books that I'm pretty sure, because there's also Yetis there, are not canon, because why are there multiple times that there's Bigfoot and living dead in this series? That's weird. But he does continue going on adventures before and after The Last Crusade because he knows that it's the right thing to do. Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade was the movie I remember the least about when going back to this. It's the one I think I watched the least while watching it when I was much younger, but I of course did watch it when I was younger, and a lot of the memories did flood back to me. But I was especially excited to get back to it, mostly after watching The Young Indiana Jones Adventures. After seeing the very troubled relationship between him and his father, it's clear that this would be a great way to finally really conclude that time of his arc. Him and his father have never seen eye to eye, and after the death of his mom, it's clear that Indy and Senior had never really been able to reconnect, and they never were able to say what they wanted to say to each other. That's literally what Senior says when he assumes that his son dies right in the middle of the movie, and it's a very touching moment that isn't undercut by the comedy. This movie is a very funny movie. It's a lot more comedy than the previous one, and maybe that might be like a reason why some may not like it, but the father-son relationship is an incredibly well-written one that feels perfectly natural and very much the way it probably would continue onward from The Young Indiana Jones Adventures. It's clearly people behind that show really watched this movie and knew what they were doing when they were writing it, but it makes this movie even more satisfying and even better of a movie knowing that they have had this problem for a very long time. Technically you do, but it is a good way to introduce the fact that Indiana has always wanted to do this sort of thing and why his father has always had trouble with him, because he's always been the person who's not been wanting to do what his father wanted him. And that is the most important part of this movie. His father, who for various reasons has pushed him away as the years have went on, has finally seemingly found one of the main reasons, which is attempting to find the Holy Grail, and due to this has went missing. Thus, Indy and Henry's good friend, Marcus Brody, do decide to meet up with a supposed associate, that being Elsa Schneider, as they look through the catacombs that are apparently under the library. Alongside rats and other creepy stuff that happens to be down there, they do find the rest of the map, which will seemingly lead them to the Grail. Of course, have to run the line up to Austria, which gets them caught, ultimately because the associate ends up being a Nazi and evil. Accidentally set fire to the castle, but are thankfully able to escape, soon enough getting onto a... And in a very funny scene, probably my favorite, he throws the dude out of it so that they don't get caught.
No ticket.
They find their way to Hatay to meet up with Sala, who reveals exactly where the Nazis are going and that they're going to find them there. As they make their way there, they fight a Nazi in a tank, and Indiana nearly falls off a whole cliff. Despite fighting off the Nazis, they're still captured by the Nazis immediately because they have to go to the cavern. Indy's forced to go through the crazy puzzles after Senior is shot, but it goes through the crazy puzzles, the saws, the floor, which honestly would love to know how they did that. Finally leading them into the choose which one of these cups is poison. Obviously, main villain chooses wrong, but Indy chooses right by choosing the absolute worst cup. And after he gives it to his dad, the evil Nazi lady, because she's evil and a Nazi, tries to escape with it. And then, you know, gets the wrong choice again. But we get to the very touching moment between Senior and Indiana as he finally calls him Indiana to tell him that it's not worth nearly dying to get that cup, which is not only a great moment because he finally really acknowledges his son the way his son wanted him, but also he tells him to not get the Grail, the thing that he had been obsessed over throughout all these many years. The two of them accept that this is, you know, not the right thing to do, and they don't do this sort of thing for this reason. I love this moment so much. It's this gratifying conclusion to this arc, not only throughout this movie of these funny duo constantly bickering for good reasons, but also from knowing how these people's lives have been up until this point. And this wouldn't be the last time that they would go on adventures with each other, though Senior wouldn't go on too many adventures because he was obviously getting up in the years, ultimately finding his love for adventuring again, finally gaining the support he's been wanting to get for so many years from his father in order to do so. It's finally a win-win all the way up until the point of World War II. War, hey, what is it good for? This song got copyrighted in the friggin' first part of the thing, and I hate YouTube. Yeah, in the big time skip between the what was supposed to be the last movie ever, and then the movie that brought it all back, that being, you know, Crystal Skull, World War II happened. It begun and ended quite a bit before, right? So, you know, what was Indiana Jones doing? Obviously fighting Nazis, but not just on his own. He started working with the OSS, which was the sort of precursor to the CIA, right? That's kind of what they were doing. This secret service that ultimately is meant to do secret servicey things during World War II to stop the Nazis from getting things. And that's sort of why they hired him. They basically, at first, allowed funding to his expeditions because they happen to be in counter interest to what the Nazis were doing, but also they just worked directly for the OSS, meeting up some new friends that we'll sort of see in 4, and also continuing this relationship with a woman that he would meet during the events of the 2 first Lucasfilm games, that being Fate of Atlantis, in which, in one of these missions with the OSS, he would meet up with this woman who is researching Atlantis, and would sort of start this relationship with this woman whom is basically on the level of Marion Crane of women that Indiana really actually had feelings for, and then she continued with the OSS into their reformation to the CIA, to then allowing Indiana to get hired by them for the events of the Infernal Machine, where Babylon apparently made golems and stuff. I'm not sure these, alongside the other game, are canon. I'm a little bit more ready to accept them as canon because they're really fun. I mean, Atlantis is, the other 2 aren't that great. But you know, still, it's a thing. Even if you ignore those, there is multiple stories that do have weird stuff that are definitely canon, that do establish the other books as also being canon, right? The books that happened during the OSS show that he fought against some Nazis trying to make some weird machines with, and some had like a cyborg arm, and they tried to raise the dead because at least raising the dead is a thing in this world in some way. In it, and in these adventures in the OSS, which would probably be its own section of the adult Indiana Jones Adventures show that now exists, I guess. There was quite a bit of stuff that had happened, and he had made sure that the Nazis didn't get any magical artifacts. But at that point, it was mostly throughout these sorts of adventures and not on the front lines, because at this point he was in his 40s. So he did help outplan certain things in World War II, supposedly the storming of Normandy. Yes, actually, he did indeed begin to slow down in his late 40s, early 50s, because at this point, you know, you kind of can't really tomb raid as easily as you could. Besides the one adventure that we see him trying to stop the Nazis from pretending that they have a bunch of mystical artifacts, and then him going to help his father find the real Lance of Longinus, which they end up finding, and obviously it gets trapped under a cave somewhere, because it always does. After his father passes, he begins to really slow down, and only really occasionally help some people when they need help, which of course is during when the CIA asked him, and also helping his one Native American friend help get his land, which, you know, was at the middle parts of Mystery of the Blues, which, to mention that real quickly, is really funny. They just sort of escape these random guys, find themselves in like a area in the Antarctic, and he uses jazz to defeat enemies, which is funny. I love that he can do that. But this does lead us into 1957 with Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the movie that a lot of people really, really don't like, for entirely good reasons, of course. It seems that even, during the filming of the 3rd film, that they were ready to make more. In fact, there was a deal signed to make 5 films. It's weird that eventually they did make 5 films, it just took them a long time to finally get them out. But in general, Lucas wasn't wanting to go past the trilogy. He thought that it was perfectly fine, and that whatever that technically counted as would be acceptable with seasons of a show. Probably the reason why Paramount, moving past it, ultimately we have now a new movie finally coming about years after, due to the fact that Lucas, before making the Star Wars prequels, went, what if we brought aliens into it? Even back in the late 90s, well before this was ever made, the aliens idea was always on the cards, and they had constantly met up, thought about it, decided to not do it, and continued on with their own work before finally getting together and deciding to do it. Overall, plot and everything about it, I feel like this movie does give us a very good continuation of Indiana Jones' character arc, and is it as bad as everyone says, honestly? Again, I had not seen this movie for many years since it had come out when I was much, much younger, right? But now finally watching, I realized, it's fine, it's not good, but it's not awful. Beginning in 1957, we're in the mid-Cold War, and we gotta do Cold War stuff that might potentially make it hot. And to do that, they gotta find some kind of weird magical gem, which ends up being a skull. To do that, they try and find the weird remnants of a creature that happens to be in Hangar 51, the place that, of course, the Ark is put. However, they're not looking for the Ark, though they could have easily found it because it was right there. They're looking for the weird creature, which from the Roswell incident, which, if you know anything, means that aliens. And if you couldn't tell aliens from the start, then you're a little bit goofy. As it turns out, Indiana, alongside his war buddy, are brought there, and that his war buddy is in fact working with the KGB and has turned on him. Indiana is able to escape in this actually very well-made action scene before coming into a bomb testing area, where he, of course, as everyone knows, goes into a fridge to survive a nuke, which, you know, isn't very possible. We'll move on, though. Johnny related to all of this, someone that some greaser known as Mutt Williams wants Indy's help because his mom supposedly knows him and she's been captured by the KGB. So Indy's like, well, I have to do that anyway, so might as well. But more importantly, they're doing that because his mom had known Oxley, a man that Indy had known in college, like I mentioned, who apparently had gone crazy while looking into the Crystal Skull, and apparently had nearly found it. While looking into some carvings made by Oakley, they're able to find the grave of Francisco de Orellana, or that guy, which contains the Crystal Skull, or a Crystal Skull at least, because there's possibly more of them, one of which is a bad beer made by an okay actor. This leads him to a camp in the Amazon, where of course the KGB happen to be looking at right now, which ends up having Mutt's mom, who ends up being Marion Ravenwood. After the whole group tries to escape from the KGB, which they, by the way, do very unsuccessfully and end up in probably the least funny scene of the whole movie with the quicksand thing, he does reveal that in fact Mutt is his son, which lines up pretty well. After this, he begins to try and be a lot more careful around Mutt and tries to help Mutt be a much better fighter during all this and tries to, you know, be sort of a dad. He immediately latches on to the opportunity to help teach his son not die in these sorts of situations. The group now once again tries to escape with Oxley and Crystal Skull, which they do in this both half pretty good to do the way they have the like car-to-car fighting, and then half not that great because of the clear blue screen and the monkeys.
You stupid monkey!
Before escaping into the big evil CGI ants, which honestly, despite being CGI, don't look too terrible and are still creepy because good lord, that's horrifying. Look at that man getting eaten by ants. Able to get into the secret underground area, which has a whole big Aztec temple in it, which is where they finally find the whole point to all this is just El Dorado, where the crystal skulls be placed upon a big pedestal, where all of them together are able to see what's the truth here, which ends up being that the big Aztec temple is a giant spaceship, which just sort of like shoves so much information that the main villain just kind of dies, and then it leaves. And then the group kind of just moves on going, let's never talk about that ever again. After this, of course, Marion and Indy finally do get married, and Mutt is right there celebrating with them. They begin to try and raise a family. More than likely, they have more kids. I'd like to imagine that's the case, because there's other kids in the, like, old Indy scenes of Young Indiana Jones Adventures, but whatever, we'll move on. And I'd like to imagine it's very happy for a good bunch of time. This really does show more of who Indiana Jones is as a person. He's begun to slow down in the later years of his life. He's begun to realize that he likes adventuring as much as he does. He has to slow down eventually, and now's the right time to settle down. One of the main things his father unfortunately wasn't able to see before he passed was Indiana settling down. And as much as he liked adventuring alongside his son, he did know that there was a time where you kind of gotta stop doing all the big important things that you feel an obligation to do, because he's just too old to do it. And that's the point of Indiana Jones's arc by the point of 4. He finally sees that he is at the position that his father was, and he wants to be a better father than his father ever was. If he wants to be there for his son right now, instead of it taking a longer time than it should have. Though yes, Indiana Jones 4 is an incredibly goofy movie that was not very well made, mostly because it was clear that this was at the time where Lucas really wanted to go, hey, we could do so much with CGI, which was basically the whole point of the Star Wars prequels, and very much like the Star Wars prequels, he sort of just made a little bit too much of it, and it didn't make a lot of sense. But when you really look at that in that way, and you ignore how absolutely absurd all of it is, it does have some pretty good character writing, right? I do like Mutt Williams as a character. I think he's actually really funny, and I enjoy the relationship between him and Indy. Had they continued this a lot sooner than, you know, many years afterwards, I would have totally been down for another adventure between these two. It sucks that we never really get to see that, right? No other adventure was ever made that takes place after this in any way, besides obviously Dial of Destiny. So we never really get to see what else happened with him and Mutt after this. And again, Indy's arc is great. It finally comes full circle as he begins to finally settle down and really repair what he had done in terms of his mistakes of the past. He finally comes together and fully matures as a person, and though obviously adventuring is cool, he realizes it's time to kind of settle down a little bit, even though it may not be the last adventure he'll ever go on. Now, more than likely, there was probably a whole bunch between him and his son throughout the next several years, but more than likely, Indy, as a person, wasn't done growing yet. As ultimately, no one really is. There's always more that a person can do to continue to change and grow in their life. That just could naturally happen, as he doesn't fully connect with his son, who more than likely wanted to do other things. While he definitely enjoyed hanging out with his father, especially going on other kinds of adventures, which I'm sure they went on, he wanted to do something else, and he probably gained the same sort of sense of duty that Indy did when going into the Vietnam War. Whereas Dial of Destiny mentions, Mutt William dies off-screen to the Vietnam War, adding to the group of characters who were important to Indy who die off-screen. But back in the summer of '69 is where the events of Dial of Destiny happen, the last, more than likely ever, Indiana Jones movie. This movie is also not that fantastic. Just kind of off the bat here, it is very much a very basic, boring adventure that is the more modern version of, hey, we could do so much with CGI. Yeah, if you thought that was a problem in the 2000s, it's still very much a problem now, but it's even more of a problem, because we deal with the monkeys and the ants. I can't deal with the horrible-looking bugs that barely look like they're there, the bad facial touches that they give Harrison to make him a lot younger, the bad rubbery movements that happen to people who are like falling off of stuff or jumping around because we can't just have stunts anymore, or like clever photography to really, hide how things look like. Whatever, man. The movie feels immensely lazy, and it feels like it didn't really try, and what it gives us is a story that's just probably the weakest out of the whole franchise. Like, actually, while maybe some of those stories of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles are probably worse than this is right down there with some of the worst stories, just in general. It's boring, it feels like nothing really happened, nobody gained anything, and God knows it plays more into remember those characters that were back in the 80s and 90s? Now they're old and sad, and here they are. By the end of this, we're at the same place we were at the end of 4, right? Indiana Jones has now fully settled down, and he's finally learned how to pass on his adventures to someone else, to a rightful person, who will be able to continue his adventures going forward because he really can't anymore. This movie we see even more so than 4 of he is getting much older and he really cannot do all that adventure-y stuff. All of it is indeed about finding the Dial of Destiny, where ex-Nazis are being used by the CIA, who are using them in Project Paperclip, which is an actual thing, wasn't just a thing in Marvel, to try and help them in different sciencey stuff. It helped them win the space race, something that, again, I want to remind you, Andy also had something to do with, because he technically helped the earliest rockets. Just wanted to put that out there again. And though we don't get any indie opinions about the fact that we're on the moon now, which would have been cool to have, all things considered, all we really get is him dealing with his goddaughter, with a character who, again, we only really meet in this movie, who's now also trying to keep the Dial of Destiny away, who ultimately ends up really just getting in the way. So he has to sneak his way and find his goddaughter, who, alongside her ex-mob boyfriend, end up getting in this big chase scene, which was probably the most interesting part of the movie, before they find the Dial of Destiny and find out where it's supposed to go in these big caverns that Indy can barely climb because he's really old and tired now. Again, we're in that era. I'm so old, oh, I can't murder anymore. I'm so old, I can't save the world anymore. I'm so old, I can't da-da-da-da-da-da-da. They end up finding the exact coordinates that they need to find in order to find a time portal, which, of course, the Nazis turn on the CIA agents and are like, yeah, that's right, we are Nazis and we're going to find the time portal to change the timeline of World War II. And they almost do. They find the fucking time portal and send all the way back to Rome. They time travel to Rome, and Indy nearly dies and decides to go, I'm just gonna sit right here and die. Thankfully, his goddaughter punches him in the face and tells him to not do that, bringing him back home so that he can finally reunite with Marion, who he's not been talking to the last couple of years. Indy was ready to move on, and throughout this movie, the only good part of it is Indy's arc, right? He is realizing that despite everything he's tried to do, it didn't work. And though he wanted to be the best that he possibly could, he wasn't able to be. He was not able to save his son. And throughout this movie, he has to deal with that fact is not going to change. He can't change that. He has to keep moving forward because there are other things, and probably other kids, that he has to take care of, with the most important of which being Marion, who's his wife that he loves. Finally realizes that regardless of what he's done, he still is in a better place, and he finally has matured into the old man that he always wanted to be. Dial of Destiny isn't great, but Indiana Jones' arc kind of comes to its conclusion fully for the final time, having one last big adventure being part of history. Indiana Jones is a very complicated character, a very complex character, and he grows and changes as a person and matures over all of these movies, settling down and living a much more peaceful life after finally doing so many things, part of so many important events in history, or meeting so many important people throughout history. He's lived a long and journeyed life, and it's time by the end of Dial of Destiny to finally settle down. He technically has already settled down in 4, but he was never able to fully stop what he was doing, and it finally takes Dial of Destiny for him to allow other people to have those adventures instead of him. Because at this point, God knows, he really can't. You know what? Dial of Destiny isn't a good conclusion to the character. Like, it really isn't, right? The way 4 was, the way it ended was fine. 4 wasn't great, but it was better than 5, certainly, because at least it was more enjoyable and weirder, right? But with absolutely nothing that was Dial of Destiny, it seems that the story of Indiana Jones from the birth to near death kind of just ends in this very disappointing fashion, right? It's just not a great way to bring back this character into this older, sadder era for absolutely nothing, for a conclusion we already kind of saw that they give a lesser version of because they killed Mutt off in between. Now, I know Shia LaBeouf is a dumb, stupid asshole, but also, come on, they had to just do him like that and then not really explore his character all that much. Obviously, these movies aren't about deep characterization, but they do a good job at subtly telling us who these characters are, and when you give absolutely nothing of what Indy is feeling and the way he's reacting to all this situation, it's weird, and I would have at least loved an acknowledgement of him going, oh, we went on the moon last year. However, that is not the conclusion of Indiana Jones's big character arc in our retrospective, because of course I was holding off on the old Indiana Jones adventures. You can find the old Indiana Jones stuff of the bookends from the young Indiana Jones stuff on YouTube, right? The way they're cut now on Disney Plus, you know, that version of Indy isn't shown at any point, right? However, you can still find it. It's not impossible. It's not fully lost media. And this stuff, I feel, is a much better conclusion to Indy as a character. Watching these, knowing what he's been through, and knowing that he's finally settled down as a not only grandpa, but great-grandpa, really gives me this nice, peaceful, and hopeful conclusion to this character's arc. He tells his tales constantly to people, and he helps the world around him, though not physically anymore. He is able to inspire other people to continue being better people with his stories, as much as some people end up being kind of annoyed by it, because he immediately sets into a story every time anything happens. He also totally, assaulted this one kid and then went to jail and then got out of jail by telling one of these stories because nobody wanted to hear it. Honestly, the bookends are very funny, but also very cool, showing that Indy, despite being as old as he is still this cool, rugged old man that still has it. He meets up with the girl that he fell in love with in Paris. And due to the fact that we don't really see some kind of older Marion, or at least any kind of older women in that big scene with the family, it's probable that Marion passed away in the years after Indy 5, and that Indy continued on after her, and then was able to find love again in the way later parts of his life. And in a way, this one romance that I was hoping was Endgame kind of was, as he gets back with her all these years later. And then, of course, there's that Thanksgiving dinner of him meeting with people who are all part of his family. Whether they be his grandkids or his kids, everyone there is related in some way to Indiana Jones. And it's cool to see that he continued to do what he learned was important in his later years of life, that he had begun to set out. His new adventure, different from the tomb raiding that he had done throughout all of his years, was one that was his longest and hardest, but one that had the greatest treasure at the end of it, which is people that care about him. I don't really want to see a prequel because I don't want to see like Indiana Jones without it being Harrison Ford, and I don't want to see Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones anymore because he's getting up there, so you have to stop now. But in a very similar way to how, as an Assassin's Creed fan, I sort of saw the birth and death of probably the greatest character in all of fiction, I see once again another big, major journey for a very similar kind of character, and a character who's definitely on the same level of how much stuff that we know about his life and how many adventures he's went on, and the amount that he has changed throughout all of the years. This man has grown and changed through many different ways throughout all the many years he had been alive and had all the adventures he had went on, and it was absolutely fantastic to finally fully experience everything that I had always wondered about the other parts of the series, and re-experience the movies that I had known since childhood. Indiana Jones is one of the most iconic characters of fiction in general, whether it be through comic books, regular books, video games, TV shows, or movies. Indiana Jones is a character that will hopefully be remembered by all kinds of people throughout all time. Now, maybe people will forget a little bit and move on to other things, because without new movies of a new franchise, people begin to forget about much older things. Regardless of whatever way people continue the legacy and lineage of Indiana Jones, what we know here of this character's as we know him now's story is that it is big, storied, and absolutely entertaining. Regardless of the ins and outs and the ups and downs throughout the quality of all of the franchise, there was so much to enjoy, and this big adventure is something that I'm glad I went through. But that is it for my big retrospective of Indiana Jones. That was my quick little run through of all of the movies and why I enjoy them so much. But more importantly, you know, this being the second part, it's good to not only watch that first part, but also to watch this part. It was fun making these. It was hard making these, but I am glad I finally went through the entire franchise, right? I love this franchise, and it's definitely grown on me as I've watched all of these. But of course, I've been the Movie-a-thoner. If you enjoyed this big retrospective, then go ahead and subscribe and leave a like to this video and share it to everyone you possibly can. More importantly, leave me any other franchises you want me to go through this big retrospective on. Definitely, I'd love to do the thing that I want to do, which was the point of the channel in the first place. But most importantly, stay good, stay safe, don't be an asshole.